Hi, this is Sawyer. I am talking about the classroom of Tian-Do. Then they were called Bo and Peep. It was 1976 in July, approximate 4th, I think, 3rd or 4th, 1976 is when we gathered in Wyoming after 9.5 months, or actually a year for some, and 3.5 years for Bo and Peep. They were on the road giving meetings. Of course, it was only the last year that it was public meetings. Before that, it was Tian-Do one-on-one with whoever they met and whoever they went to meet. And they went to meet people like Billy Graham and Claire Prophet at the time, who was with her husband, who said they were the two witnesses. And actually, Tian-Do, little story on the side is that they walked into Oklahoma City, into the center that was called Lighthouse something. The Lighthouse, maybe. Anyway, and they said they wanted to speak to the prophets. That was their last name, I guess, that they chose. And so they, the person, there was a reception desk, and the person said, "Well, who should I say is calling?" And they said, "Say the two witnesses." And they said, "That can't be." And the receptionist said, "That can't be. The prophets are the two witnesses." So, so Tian-Do at that point thought, this is very interesting, because they didn't know there were other people that were saying that they were the two witnesses. They just weren't in touch with all that was going on. I don't know how many people were saying that, actually, because people were saying they were Jesus, but not the two witnesses. Anyway, I'm not saying there weren't any. But I'm going to move from that to 1976, July 4th, approximately, when the 6 groups that had been doing public meetings were told to stop by Tian-Do before that, when she actually said the harvest was over. No more people coming in. She closed it off. From that point, they let people go. They got rid of people. They told them to go to a different campground if they didn't want them to stay, if they didn't think that they were capable of doing this task. And I mean, I don't mean to sound like that was arrogant. It wasn't on their part. It wasn't arrogant at all. I'm sorry I might be making it look that way because I'm humorous about it. But I mean, what I was picturing in my head was how people come down on cults, understandably so, and that's why I'm laughing, because the dichotomy of Tian-Do's group and everybody else is, frankly, opposites, complete opposites. Because Tian-Do were the real thing. Now, of course, I say that because I'm a disciple, but a student. But if you look at the evidence, you'd see why. And the only way you're going to see the evidence is if you read everything they wrote and then listen to everybody that had personal experience with them. So, which I'm doing because I was with them for 19 years. For anybody that's watching this for the first time. So here they told us to stop giving meetings and to go to Wyoming. And we all got there, and we all put up tents in the Vedauwoo area. Actually, the Vedauwoo campground in Medicine Bow National Forest between Laramie and Cheyenne. And we all had our groups were actually situated themselves in groups in the forest there. And if anybody knows, it's a high plateau, so there's big rocks and rock formations and sparse forest, evergreens, small evergreens, because it's so high elevation. And other than that, it's pretty barren. There's not a lot of ground vegetation. Anyway, so it's And then Tiendo started to relate with the individual groups and called us all to meetings in a certain part of the forest where we'd all drive our beat up cars because they were pretty beat up by then. And we'd have meetings. And then Tiendo set up meetings in Laramie at the university, which always baffled me. But they had us all go to a classroom. I don't know how they set it up. I know they didn't go in there and say we're the UFO cult. That was in the news. They had some other thing that they were talking about it, but they would have made it true. It wouldn't have been dishonest. The names would have been dishonest. It wouldn't be their birth names, but they had long left their birth names anyway. So that was like incidental. But they would have said something like they're an experimental study group. Experimental on what? Philosophy, UFOs, New Age. Well, they might have said that they were a meditation group because we did meditation, but it wasn't in any strict form. It was just basically talking to the next level. And then later, we actually had sitting meditations where we would sit comfortably in a chair and visualize light coming through the top of our head through the pineal gland and going through all the cells of our body one by one, filling it and healing everything. So that's and of course we thought the light was coming from the next level, and they're beings. They're not just universe. They're not channeling the universe. Although the rulers of the universe were channeling their energy. We don't want anybody else. We didn't want the discarnates. We didn't want the ascended masters because what are called ascended masters is ascended in mind, but Jesus was ascended in mind and body, but not just in the sense of coming back again with to life after being dead for 2 days or 3 days or 3.5 days, but being ascended in body, being ascended above human, no longer acting human at all. That means no reproduction like human, no masturbation like human, no eating like human, no talking like human. Transmit thoughts back and forth is the way they communicate because they're not human. They don't need vocal cords. It's an inaccurate way of actually conversing. For us, it's the most accurate we've got, except for now we've learned digital. But digital doesn't have any nuance or flexibility to it unless you build it in there, and then you're still getting it artificially. It's not on the fly, it's not real, it's not living in the sense of life that we're talking about it. Biological life. It's just a copy of biological. It's trying to be a copy of biological life by recording biological life and then projecting it back in all its forms. In any case, so they gathered us in Wyoming, and I don't know if I left a loose end there. I always do, but and so one of the first lessons was to learn about the reality of discarnate beings, and so to help instill this in us, so it wasn't just strictly talking in a classroom. They put a physical activity in that, and what they said to do was you could build a perimeter around your camp with sticks. Just, the boughs, the branches, the little pieces that we didn't cut any. We didn't cut anything. They were very protective like that. They didn't want to disturb the environment any more than they had to. And I was personally recognized that because they were the biggest environmentalists that there were in that sense. Like I was a chainsaw operator. That's how I got the name Sawyer. Actually, I got the name before I was operating the chainsaw. Well, maybe not. No, I think it was after I started using the chainsaw. I don't know, it doesn't matter. But in any case, I would use the chainsaw to clear areas because we were living in Utah in the mountains there by Provo, and it snowed, and so the boughs were falling down basically places where Thindo wanted to situate the tents. He figured out where every tent would go. Not like a dictator, because he wanted it to be, he had things in mind. He was actually feeling like he was talking to T about where to put the students. Anyway, and so he would have me, if there was a bough in the way, a little branch, he would have me cut it. So I'd follow around with him, and I'd cut here, I'd cut here, and I'd cut here. Now, if I was the best I could be, I wouldn't have made any other cuts, but I wasn't. If I would see something that I thought was what he wanted to do, I would cut it. But did he tell me I was wrong? No. But I think one time he gave me an indication that what I was doing as a student was learning his ways. If I didn't want to learn his ways, then I should go to a different teacher. If I wanted to learn chemistry, he was not the person to go to, because he wasn't his vehicle, and the mind that was being brought into that vehicle, which wasn't necessarily all his mind. He said actually it might have been most of his mind, but that T didn't need all her mind to do this task. T could operate other vehicles doing tasks, or another vehicle. He didn't say vehicles. He said another vehicle at the same time. I don't know if she could operate many vehicles. So, you know, it depends on how big your mind is, and what power it can extend to different vehicles, because it is like having a network. It is creating a network. And what a picture for a science fiction, right? I'm sure there's people, I've already seen things that I feel like T&O gave me that I then saw. Now, that doesn't mean I just have them. No, that means that they've been provided for anybody that can tap into it. It's in the atmosphere. It's in the airwaves. So, so the fact that I could tap into it, I know I'm not the only one that can tap into it. Depends on what you're asking for, and what you're thinking, and who you're directing it to. That's what you get the core from. You can get the background, you can get even more direct, because when you open up that channel to go only to the next level, then everything else comes with it. But if you don't open up the channel to the next level, then you don't have the overview of extending that channel to a big enough scope. It's actually a fine enough scope, so that you can pull in, like the vacuum, all the information that's being funneled down. So we gathered there, and they had us put sticks, and they didn't watch us do this. They just told us this is the lesson step. And so we put sticks around, and we connected them so that there weren't any leaks. And this was also I mean, the main reason for this was to instill that, to keep our mind, our brain, free of these same influences. So how do you do that? Well, you have to cut off the past entirely. Not have any thoughts about the past, not about the people of the past, because our capacity has to be focused enough. The eye single is what you're doing. You're making your eye single to that top of the pyramid, where the point of it is the next level beings that it's directed to, the older members. In this case, the fast track of which is using the names T and Do, because those sounds, not only the sounds, but the organization of the sounds in language, is an address, just like a computer has an address for every piece of information on its hard drive. And the memory system is a living hard drive that's never turned off, though it's slowed down at times in order to recuperate the energy needed to drive it, which is produced by the animal by eating food and being in this environment and breathing and drinking water. But in the above human kingdom, is generated by the mind that you've accumulated from your older members, that you filled your soul pocket with, so that now it has a denser capacity, a denser form. The energy is more condensed somehow, and it emanates out from that, and it can do more things. And I can imagine that gets to be so big that it's like a sun. Maybe that's the older member. Maybe that's the chief there. One of the chiefs. He's operating as a son, but doesn't mean it's the only thing he can do. He just generated enough from that mind that now he's a son. Now where did it all start? Who's the chief of chiefs? Tyndall called him chief of chiefs. We're way down here, yes. We're little bitties. So to understand the chief of chiefs, now first we've got to try to understand the chief. And before that, to understand the captain. And before that, understand the admiral. I don't know if the admiral is a chief. And Doe called T an admiral, and he said he was more like a captain. So we would build pathways of sticks going to the next camp, which might have been 100, 200 yards away, 300 yards away, 400 yards away, at the most, probably. And then we had a lesson that came in that was called Smooth Whirlwind, like the whirlwind of fire. And in this one, we would all change partners. So we would go to other camps, and then we would be with somebody else that we never saw before, or we saw them at a meeting, or we happened to be in the same group with them for a while. So we did know some of them, but we wouldn't have known them very well, and we wouldn't have known them all. So to be all of a sudden now in a two-man tent, a two-person tent, or a three-person tent when there was odd numbers, but never a single. Nobody was ever single. It was always twos or threes. And that was a big lesson, because that's what the whole purpose of marriage is for humans, is to have somebody to bounce things off of, to reflect back to them what they are, who they are, what they live for, how they actually act and behave, as opposed to having nobody that can confront you with yourself. So the gurus, the ascended masters that are overcoming certain aspects of their human behaviors, especially if they're celibate, and especially if they're not attached to the pleasures that come from food, from variety and the amount and the kinds of foods and thinking about it and the making of it, and all that's a big sensuality. It's a big form of sensuality, a huge form of sensuality. And sexuality is a huge form of sensuality. And music and entertainment is another form of sensuality, stimulating the senses. So, all these things have their value and have their appropriateness even for members of the next level. Except sexuality changes into delivering seed by delivering information about your older members that can actually be the seed that grows in you to be born into membership yourself. That's the kind of reproduction they have, strictly by mind transfer. That's why that little Star Trek thing with the Nemo, or whatever his name was, who put his hands on the captain guy and transferred his mind. That idea didn't originate with humans, in that, Stanley Kubrick and the producers of Star Trek, I forgot the names, Leonard Nimoy, and he wasn't the producer, I guess, but didn't come from them. That was part of that channel of information that's been coming here at least since, well, who knows how long, in degrees. But the first recorded crash of a spacecraft with a body happened to be in Texas in, I think, 1898. And there's actually supposedly a stone somewhere that represents this unknown person that crashed out of the sky, which I suspect would have been T, the older member, coming first to scope it out and to establish the criteria, the foundation of mind. Because when they come physically among us, then they're bringing that channel in, that channel of what they want to provide. They don't have to provide everything. It's only what they want to provide through that vehicle that comes. There may be a spacecraft that's there all the time above that person. Or the internal spacecraft called Paradise, called Abraham's Bosom, may have a facility for just being in that same place, actually, physically. Maybe ascended above the ground a little bit, enough so that humans aren't walking around in their place. And maybe big enough so that airplanes are, when a civilization gets more sophisticated, maybe airplanes aren't flying through it. Because Doe said that that spacecraft could have easily been located, they thought it was at times located right on us, so that they were actually walking around in their spacecraft, members that we couldn't see, but that if we could bump into them, we would feel their presence. I don't know how we would feel it, what we would think. We might think it was a wind, I don't know. But they stay out of our way. They know where we are. They know what our limitations are, and their craft might be bigger than that. So maybe they don't. Maybe it's like a simulated craft when they go in there. You know, they know where everybody is the whole time. Perhaps. You know, Tian-Do didn't talk about that to that detail. I'm just kind of pulling on it a little bit. So I don't know. It's a fact. But so when we're changing partners. Well, we would do cooking in the tents. We didn't have a controlled dietary program, food program at that point. We actually, Tian-Do gave us money. And where did they get money? Well, some of the students had some money and brought it in, but most of them didn't have anything to speak of. I had $50. And I know my friends that joined with me, 5 of them, didn't have much more than that. In any case, so they gave like these 96 people enough food for a week at a time, so to speak. I think it was about a week, and we would just go into town and shop and buy whatever we wanted. They didn't say what we could eat, what we couldn't eat. About a year down the road, or maybe less, actually less than that, probably 6 months down the road, they started a program to where we were all making our own food, and they made it into a laboratory they called the Nutrition Lab, or the Nutri-Lab. And this is the way Tian-Do did everything. Everything was done like with precision, with organization, but it was flexible, it changed, it went with the flow, but it had certain standards. It was always trying to reach. It didn't go with the flow, like, you know, you drop something on the floor, you could eat it. No, there was a rule on it. It depended on what it was, and it depended how long it was on the floor. But most of the time, things on the floor were left on the floor. I mean, if a whole loaf of bread fell on the floor, I don't remember that happening, but I think that'd be picked up and used, you know, brushed off or whatever and used. But if, you know, if something that was liquid fell on the floor, you certainly wouldn't use it. But unless you keep your floor, you know, as clean as your plate would be. But so they were very particular about cleanliness in the camp as well, and that's where they taught us to bathe every day. We did sponge baths, where we heated some water on a Coleman 2-burner stove that they bought for us, and we had cots to keep us off the ground, because they also believed that our head should be off the ground. And we slept 2 to a tent.